The pine needles were knives. They stabbed into the raw skin of her palms as she crawled. Each movement was a fresh agony, a tearing of flesh that had already frozen and split. The world was a blur of gray trunks and white ground. She knew she was bleeding. She could feel the slow, sticky warmth matting the hair on the side of her head. A warmth that was frighteningly pleasant against the savage cold. Her name was Clara, but the name felt distant, like it belonged to someone else, someone who had worn a clean calico dress and pinned her hair up that morning, someone who had still believed in the goodness of men. That person was gone. Only this creature remained, this animal dragging itself through the snow, driven by a single, dull instinct. Move! She did not know how long she had been crawling. Hours, maybe. The sky had been a flat, uncaring gray when they left her, the two of them. They had taken the small brooch her mother had given her, and the 4 silver dollars sewn into the hem of her skirt. They had taken more than that. They had tried to break what was left. Her ribs screamed. One of them must have broken when the heavy boot caught her as she lay on the ground. Every breath was a shallow, painful gasp that burned in her lungs. Thirst was a fire in her throat. Her lips were cracked open, and she tasted the iron of her own blood when she tried to wet them with a tongue that felt thick and dry as dust. She remembered the sound of their laughter. It echoed in her head, louder than the wind sighing through the high branches. They had thought it was a fine joke, leaving her here, miles from any trail, with nothing but a torn dress in the heart of a Colorado winter. She had stopped screaming for them to come back, to just kill her, after the first hour. Now, she only whimpered, a sound lost in the vast, cold silence of the mountains. The light began to fail. The gray sky deepened to a bruised slate, and the shadows between the trees thickened, turning from gray to black. A single, perfect snowflake landed on the back of her bloody hand. She watched it melt. Then another came, and another. The wind picked up, carrying a flurry of white that stung her face and blurred the trees ahead. It was over. She knew it. She could not crawl another foot. The last of her strength, the last spark of defiance, guttered and went out. She found a large ponderosa pine, its trunk wide enough to offer the illusion of shelter. With a groan, she dragged her body against it, curling into a tight ball, pulling the torn scraps of her skirt over her legs. The snow was beginning to stick, dusting her dark hair white. Her body began the final, violent shiver, a tremor that shook her from head to toe, rattling her teeth together so hard she thought they would break. She tried to pray. The words her father had taught her, the ones she used to whisper every night, came back in broken pieces. "Our Father, deliver us!" But the words were hollow. There was no deliverance here, only the cold and the dark and the falling snow. She closed her eyes. The shivering was slowing down, replaced by a strange, heavy warmth, a dangerous comfort. She was so tired. She thought of her mother, of a warm kitchen, of the smell of baking bread. It was not a bad way to go. It was quiet. Then she heard a sound, a heavy, rhythmic crunching in the snow. Not the light tread of a deer, or the pad of a wolf. This was measured, heavy. She opened her eyes, but the world was swimming. A shape, a tall, dark shape, darker than the trees, moving through the swirling snow. Death, she thought. It has finally come for me. It was riding a horse. Eli pulled his horse, a sturdy buckskin named Boulder, to a halt. The horse tossed its head and snorted, its breath a white plume in the freezing air. Eli pulled his hat low and squinted into the gloom. He was tired. It had been a long ride from town, and the promise of his cabin, of hot coffee and a thick slab of bacon, was the only thing that had kept him moving for the past 2 hours. He hated this wind. It always brought the worst storms. He was just about to urge Boulder on when he saw it. To the side of the narrow game trail he followed, half hidden by a drift, a dark stain on the snow. He leaned over in the saddle. Blood, and not from an animal. It was too scattered. And there, a few feet away, was the faint, dragged track of a body. His hand went instantly to the Winchester in its scabbard by his knee. He was a man who lived by suspicion. In this country, A man who was not suspicious was a man who was dead. Trouble came in many forms. A Ute war party, a grizzly, or, worst of all, other white men. He dismounted, his movements fluid and quiet, keeping the horse between him and the trees. "Hello?" he called out. His voice was low, rough as gravel. Only the wind answered. He pulled the rifle free and clicked the hammer back. He followed the trail. It was fresh. The snow had not yet covered the dark spatters. He saw the scuffed snow, the place where someone had fallen, crawled. He moved from tree to tree, his eyes scanning the gathering darkness. He found her huddled at the base of the large pine, a bundle of rags. He thought she was already dead. He kept his rifle trained on her, circling, looking for whoever had done this. Was it a trap? He saw no one, just the endless silent trees and the falling snow. He nudged the bundle with the toe of his boot. A low moan escaped it. Alarm shot through him, sharp and unwelcome. This was not a trap. This was something worse. He knelt, laying his rifle in the snow beside him, close to his hand. He reached out with a gloved hand and pushed the tangled, snow-dusted hair away from her face. It was a woman, or had been. Her face was a ruin of swelling and dried blood. One eye was swollen completely shut. Her lips were blue and split. He saw the dark, finger-shaped bruises on her throat. A cold, familiar rage tightened his gut. He put his ear near her mouth, a small, frosty cloud of breath. She was alive. Barely. He shook her shoulder, harder this time. Ma'am, you hear me?" Clara's world swam back into painful focus. The dark shape was kneeling over her. A man, the smell of leather, wet wool, and horses. A new terror, cold and sharp, cut through the fog. She tried to scramble back, but her limbs would not obey. She saw the hard lines of his face in the gloom, the rough beard, the coldness in his eyes. He was not one of them, but he was a man. "Let me die," she whispered. It was not a plea. It was a request. She had nothing left to fight with. Eli heard her. The words, barely a breath, hit him harder than a punch. He had seen men die. He had seen them beg for life. He had never heard someone beg for death with such simple, awful honesty. He looked at her broken face. He looked at the snow, now falling thick and fast. If he left her, she would be frozen solid by morning. He thought of his sister, Sarah. He thought of her face, pale and bloodless, her eyes wide with a surprise that had never left them. He stood up. His decision made, it was a bitter one. He did not want this. He did not want another person's life in his hands. But the world had left him no choice. "You're not dying alone tonight," he said. The words were flat, an order, not a comfort. He turned his back on her and went to work. With a swift, practiced anger, he unstrapped the hatchet from his saddle. He found a deadfall nearby, and in minutes, he had a pile of dry branches and tinder. He shielded his flint and steel from the wind, and a small spark caught. He blew it gently, his face illuminated by the growing orange glow. The fire crackled to life, a small pocket of defiance in the vast, hostile wilderness. Clara watched him. He moved with a heavy, certain grace. The firelight flickered across his back. She felt the first hint of its warmth, and it was agonizing, a wave of pins and needles attacking her frozen skin. He came back to her and unbuttoned his heavy sheepskin coat. The wind hit him, but he seemed not to notice. He knelt and, without a word, began to wrap the coat around her. It was huge, heavy, and smelled of him, of smoke and horse and something metallic. The warmth was immediate, a heavy, sinking comfort that made her want to weep. "I'm going to lift you," he said. The panic she had held at bay surged. "No, don't, please!" She tried to push his hands away, but her arms had no strength. Eli saw the terror in her one good eye. He saw her flinch away from his touch. He understood. He did not soften his voice. He had to get her out of here. "I am not one of them," he said, his voice flat. "But you will die if you stay here. You can fight me and die, or you can let me help you and maybe live. It's your choice." She stared at him, her body trembling. He was not gentle, but he was not cruel. He was simply stating a fact. She gave a small, defeated nod. "This will hurt," he warned. He slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees. She cried out, a sharp, choked sound as her broken ribs shifted. He ignored it, lifting her as easily as if she were a child. He felt the sickening lightness of her. She was all bone. He carried her to the horse. Boulders shied at the smell of blood, but a sharp word from Eli calmed him. With a grunt, Eli swung himself into the saddle. He reached down, grabbed Clara by the front of his coat, and hauled her up, settling her sideways across his lap. She was a dead weight, her head lolling against his chest. He wrapped his coat tighter around her, took the reins in one hand, and urged Boulder forward, leaving the small fire behind to be swallowed by the snow. The ride was a nightmare. For Clara, it was a blur of motion and pain. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady plod of the horse, the sting of the snow on her face, and the solid wall of the man's chest behind her. She was so cold, and yet where her body touched his, she felt a burning heat. She whimpered, muttering names he could not understand. Eli rode with his jaw set. Her small, broken weight against him was an accusation. He was angry at the men who had done this, angry at the world for putting her in his path, and angry at himself for the guilt that was already coiling in his stomach. He held her tight, his arm a steel band around her waist, protecting her from the jolts of the ride. The storm howled around them, a white curtain that hid the world. It was near midnight when they reached the cabin. It was small, dug into the side of a hill, with a low sod roof that was already white with snow. He dismounted, dragging her with him, and practically carried her to the door. He kicked it open and stumbled inside, into the pitch-black cold. He set her down on the narrow cot against the far wall. She slumped onto the thin mattress and did not move. "Stay," he commanded, though she was clearly incapable of leaving. He moved through the darkness with familiarity, lighting the lantern on the table. The small room flickered into view. It was stark, clean, a cast-iron stove, a table with one chair, shelves with tins and sacks of flour, a water barrel in the corner, his rifle rack by the door. It was a place for one man, and no more. He stuffed the stove with wood and lit it. The iron began to tick as it heated. He filled a black kettle with water from the barrel and set it on the stove to heat. Then he turned to her. The lantern light was merciless. He saw the full extent of the damage. Her calico dress was stiff with frozen blood and dirt. He had to get her out of it. He took his hunting knife from his belt. She saw the blade flash, and a small, terrified sound came from her throat. "It's for the dress," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's ruined, and it's freezing you." He did not wait for her permission. He carefully, slowly, cut the fabric away from her shoulders, trying not to jostle her ribs. He cut the sleeves, peeling the wet, cold cloth from her skin. Underneath, her shift was also torn and bloody. Her skin was a geography of pain. Dark, ugly bruises were blossoming on her arms, her shoulders. He saw the distinct, terrible imprint of a man's teeth on her shoulder. He looked away, his breath hissing between his teeth. He worked without speaking, cutting the cloth away, leaving her covered only by his sheepskin coat. The kettle began to hiss. He poured the steaming water into a basin, adding a splash of cold water from the barrel. He tore a strip from a clean flour sack and grabbed the bottle of whiskey from the shelf. He sat on the edge of the cot. "This is going to burn," he said. He soaked the rag in the hot water and began to clean her face. She flinched, her body tensing, but she was too weak to pull away. He washed the blood from her hair, his touch surprisingly careful for such a rough man. He cleaned the gash on her scalp, the cut on her lip. Then he poured whiskey onto the rag and pressed it to the bite mark. Clara arched off the cot with a silent scream, her body rigid. He held her down with one hand on her uninjured shoulder. "I know," he said, his voice low. "It has to be done." He cleaned every cut, every scrape, his face a mask of concentration. He found bruises in the shape of fingers on her upper arms. He found cuts on her hands from the rocks. He worked for nearly an hour, His movements economical. Detached. He was treating a wound, not a woman. It was the only way he could do it. When he was finished, he pulled the blankets from the foot of the cot up to her chin, tucking them tightly around her. He added his own bedroll, piling everything he had on top of her. She was already shivering, her teeth chattering. The fever was setting in. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what happened, or who did it. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "You're safe for the night," he promised. It was all he could give. She looked at him, her one good eye hazy with fever and confusion. She did not understand. She was alive. She was warm. She tried to say something, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. She slipped into the darkness of the fever, the image of his bearded face floating in her mind. Eli watched her for a long time. Her breathing was shallow, catching in her chest. She murmured in her sleep, restless, her hands clutching the blankets. He backed away and sat in the chair by the table. He picked up his rifle, automatically checking the load, and set it across his knees. He poured a cup of black coffee from the pot he had made, but he did not drink it. He stared at the woman on his cot. He stared at the cabin door, where the storm was rattling the latch. The wind howled like a mourning woman. He felt the old, familiar guilt rise up and settle in his chest, heavy as stone. The small, dark cabin, the howling wind, the sight of a woman beaten and broken. It all pulled him back 10 years, to a dusty room in a Kansas boarding house. His sister, Sarah. She was 17. She had his dark hair but their mother's easy smile, a smile that a man named Jennings had mistaken for an invitation. Eli was 20 then, all hard muscle and harder pride. He had warned Sarah about Jennings. He was a gambler, too smooth, his eyes too quick. Eli had been downstairs, mending a bridle, when he heard the crash, a chair overturning. Sarah's voice, sharp with fear. "No, get off me!" He moved without thinking, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The door was locked. He put his shoulder to it, and the flimsy lock splintered. Jennings was there, his fine suit coat on the floor. Sarah was backed into a corner, her dress torn at the collar. Jennings had her by the wrist. He turned, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. He had a knife in his other hand. "Get out, Eli!" Jennings snarled. "This ain't your concern." "Let her go," Eli said, his voice deadly calm. He could smell the fear on his sister. "She wanted it. She—" Eli did not let him finish. He lunged, but he was young, and he was fueled by rage, not sense. He went for Jennings, not for the knife. Jennings was quicker. He did not try to fight Eli. He just shoved Sarah forward, directly into Eli's path. Eli tried to stop. He tried to grab her, but Sarah stumbled. She fell forward, and the knife, which Jennings had been holding out, went into her. It was all so fast. A moment of stunned silence. Sarah looked down at her stomach. She looked up at Eli, her eyes wide with a terrible, uncomprehending surprise. Then she fell. Jennings was gone, out the window and onto the shed roof before Eli even hit his knees. Eli never even looked for him. He just gathered his sister in his arms. There was so much blood. He pressed his hands to the wound, but it was no use. "Eli," she whispered. "It hurts." "I know, Sarah, I know. I'm here." He held her while the light went out of her eyes. He had failed. He had been strong enough, but not smart enough. He had been fast enough, but not in the right way. He should have just shot Jennings. The second he saw the knife, he should never have hesitated. He buried her himself. He sold his horse, sold his gun, and walked away. He had been wandering ever since. He bought a new gun, a new horse. He built this cabin with his own 2 hands, a fortress against a world he no longer trusted, a place where he could not fail anyone else. And now, the world had brought him this, a woman with the same fear in her eyes, a woman who had begged him to let her die. He looked at Clara, shivering in his bed. The fever was on her strong. He knew this part. The violence was over. Now came the fight with death itself. He got up and put more wood in the stove. He sat back down, his rifle across his lap. He would not sleep. He would watch. He had let his sister die. He would not let this stranger do the same. Not tonight. The storm raged. But inside the small cabin, there was only the sound of the crackling fire and a woman's fevered, painful breath. Clara woke to the smell of wood smoke and coffee. For a moment, she was adrift, floating in a warm, dark place that held no pain. Then memory returned, a savage blow that left her breathless. Her eyes flew open. The light in the cabin was dim, a flat gray filtering through a single, small window. She was on a narrow cot, buried under a mountain of blankets and pelts. She was warm. The discovery was so shocking that she lay still for a full minute, just feeling the impossible sensation of warmth on her skin. She turned her head. The movement sent a spike of pain through her neck, and she winced. He was there. The man from the woods sat at a small table near the stove, his back to her. He was hunched over a tin cup, and even from behind, he looked solid, immovable, a fortress of wool and muscle. His rifle was not in his lap, but she saw it leaning against the wall by the door, within easy reach. The terror came back, cold and absolute. She was trapped. She had traded a slow death in the snow for a swifter one in this small, dark box. He had brought her here, tended to her, kept her warm. Why? Men did not do such things for free. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what he would expect as payment. She had to get out. She pushed the heavy blankets away, her limbs feeling like water, weak and uncooperative. The cold air of the cabin hit her bare skin. She looked down and saw she was wearing a man's long linen shirt, far too large for her. The sleeves rolled up. He had taken her clothes. The shame and fear were so strong they nearly choked her. Her feet touched the cold dirt floor. She stood up. The room spun violently. The pain in her ribs, which had been a dull ache, exploded into white-hot fire. She gasped, grabbing the wall to keep from falling. At the table, Eli heard the sharp intake of breath. He did not turn around. He had been listening to her breathing for hours, waiting for the fever to break. It had. Just before dawn, he had known she would wake up afraid. He kept his back to her, sipped his coffee, and waited. Clara leaned against the rough-hewn logs, her heart hammering against her broken ribs. He was not moving. He was ignoring her. Maybe she could make it to the door. It was only 4 steps, 5 at most. She pushed off the wall and took a step. Her knee buckled, the floor tilted. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. She reached for the table to steady herself, but missed. She collapsed, not with a crash, but in a slow, boneless crumpling, landing hard on her knees. The pain was so bright she could not even cry out. She just knelt on the cold floor, panting, humiliated and utterly defeated. Only then did Eli turn. He did not get up from his chair. He just swiveled his body, looking at her. His face was unreadable in the gray light, his eyes shadowed by his thick brows. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. She was a pathetic sight, a half-drowned kitten, all big eyes and trembling limbs, her hair a wild, dark tangle. "The door is barred," he said, his voice a low rumble, "and the snow is 4 feet deep against it. You go out there in that shirt. You'll be dead in 10 minutes. This time. I won't come looking." He picked up a tin plate from the table. On it was a piece of hardtack biscuit and a small slice of salted bacon. He pushed it across the floor with his boot, stopping it a foot from her. "Eat," he said. It was not a request. Clara stared at the food. Her stomach cramped with a hunger so fierce it was almost as sharp as the pain. But her pride, the one small, hard piece of her that was not broken, rebelled. She would not eat his food, like an animal. Off the floor, she shook her head, pulling the big shirt tighter around her. Eli sighed. It was a sound of deep impatience. He got up from the chair. Clara flinched, scrambling backward on her hands and knees until she hit the wall under the cot. She curled into a ball, pulling her knees to her chest, her one good eye wide with terror. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." Eli stopped. He was a good 6 feet away from her. But she looked at him as if he were holding a knife to her throat. He saw the marks on her neck, the dark, ugly bruises. He looked at his own hands, large, calloused, and stained with grease. He understood. He backed away slowly, deliberately, until he was on the other side of the cabin, by the stove. He turned his back to her again. "The food is for you," he said, his voice rough. "Get back in the bed. It's warm. I'm going outside to check my traps. I will be gone an hour." He pulled on his heavy sheepskin coat, the one he had wrapped her in, and his hat. He grabbed his rifle. He did not look at her as he unbarred the door. The wind howled, and a drift of fine, powdery snow blew into the room. He stepped out into the blinding white and pulled the heavy door shut behind him. The bar fell into place from the outside. Clara stayed frozen against the wall for a full minute, listening to the muffled sounds of his footsteps moving away. He had locked her in, or had he locked the world out? She was alone. She crawled to the plate of food. Her hands shook so violently she could barely pick up the bacon. She ate it in 2 bites, the salt and smoke so good it made her dizzy. She gnawed on the hardtack, softening it with her own saliva, tears of shame and gratitude rolling down her bruised cheeks. When she was done, she used the table leg to pull herself up. She stumbled back to the cot, crawled under the mountain of pelts, and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of gray light and silence. The man, she did not know his name, and she was too afraid to ask, came and went. He would be gone for hours, and when he returned, he would bring in a gust of cold air and the clean, sharp smell of pine. He never spoke to her unless he had to. He shared his routines with her, and she learned them by watching. In the morning, he would rise before the sun, light the stove, and make coffee. The smell of it was rich and bitter. He would sit at the table, drink 2 cups, and then go out. He would come back in the afternoon, sometimes with a rabbit or a brace of grouse, which he would skin and clean outside. No matter how cold, he never touched her. He never even looked at her for more than a second. He left food for her on the table, stew, or roasted meat, or just more hardtack. He would eat his own meal with his back to her. The silence in the cabin was thick, heavy as the snow outside. It was not a comfortable silence. It was painful, stretched thin with unspoken questions and unspoken fears. But it was not hostile. He was not angry with her. He seemed to feel nothing about her at all. She was just a piece of damaged furniture, something he had dragged inside to get it out of the snow. Clara began to heal. The swelling in her face went down, though the bruises turned a sickly yellow and purple. Her ribs still ached with every breath, but the sharp, stabbing pain had dulled. She could move around the small cabin now, though she was careful to stay on her side of the room. She avoided her reflection. The one window was coated with ice, but in one corner, she could see a distorted, blurry version of herself. She saw the tangled mat of her hair, the misshapen landscape of her face. She looked away. She did not want to see the creature he had saved. She hated her weakness. She hated being a burden. She was eating his food, sleeping in his bed, wearing his shirt, and she was doing nothing. One morning, after he left to check his traps, she got up and made the cot. She folded the blankets as neatly as her shaking hands would allow. It was a small, simple act, but it felt like a victory. She found a broom made of birch twigs in the corner, and she swept the dirt floor, careful to gather the ashes near the stove. When Eli came back that afternoon, he stopped just inside the door. The cabin was clean. The blankets were folded. A tin of water was heating on the stove, and the woman was sitting on the cot, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. He said nothing. He did not acknowledge the work. He just took off his coat, shook the snow from it, and hung it by the door. But that night, when he served the stew, he put her plate on the table, not on the floor, and he did not turn his back. He sat across from her. They ate in silence. The sound of their spoons scraping the tin plates was loud in the small room. Clara kept her eyes on her food, her hair falling forward to hide her face. Finally, she could not stand it anymore. The silence was worse than the wind. She had to know. Her voice was a dry, rusty croak. She had not spoken in days. "Where am I?" Eli looked up, surprised. He finished chewing his mouth full of rabbit. Medicine Bow Mountains, about 30 miles north of the Union Pacific line. 30 miles. She had crawled for hours, but she was only 30 miles from the world. It felt like 1,000. She swallowed. Her throat was tight. "What do you want?" This was the question, the one she had been dreading. Now he would tell her. Now the payment would be named. Eli looked at her. He saw her brace herself, her one good eye filling with a familiar, hunted look. He saw the terror and the resignation. It made him tired. He put his spoon down. "I want you to eat," he said, his voice flat. "I want you to heal, and then I want you to leave." Clara stared at him. She did not understand. No payment, no expectations. Just leave? He misread her confusion. "You are safe here," he said, his voice rough with an impatience that was not entirely aimed at her. "I am not the men from the woods, but this is my cabin, and I am not a charitable institution." He looked away from her, back to his stew. "You're alive," he said, more to himself than to her. "That's enough for now." That night, Clara did not sleep. She lay on the cot, listening to him breathing on his bedroll by the fire. He was right. She was alive. And for the first time since she had woken up in this cabin, she believed she might stay that way. The next day, she helped. Her body was still weak, her injuries still profound, but she had a purpose. She washed their 2 plates, their 2 cups, and their 2 spoons. She added wood to the stove. She found a sack of potatoes and a knife, and, with slow, careful movements, she peeled them for the evening stew. The normalcy of it was a balm. The simple, mindless tasks soothed the raw edges of her mind, folding blankets, sweeping the floor, preparing food. These were things the old Clara had done. Doing them now, she felt a flicker of that person returning. Eli watched her. He did not help, and he did not hinder. He let her find her own way in the small space. He saw her wince when she lifted the water bucket. He saw her hand tremble as she held the knife. But he saw the set of her jaw, the determination in her bruised face. She was not as broken as he had thought. A week passed. The snow fell, and it fell, and it fell. The world outside the small window was a swirling, endless curtain of white. The wind moans, a low, mournful sound that never stopped. One night, the storm was too much. It was a living thing, clawing at the small cabin, shaking the door in its frame. Clara was restless, her nerves stretched thin by the wail of the wind. She must have slept, because the dream came. It was always the same. The cold, the laughter, the preacher's eyes, not holy, but hungry, the weight of a man's body, the sharp, metallic smell of blood. She woke with a scream that tore out of her throat, raw and animal. She was sitting bolt upright on the cot, her hands fisted in the blankets, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. In an instant, he was there, not touching her, but beside her. He had moved from his bedroll to the edge of her cot in the time it took her to draw a breath. He had his rifle in one hand, his eyes wild, scanning the dark cabin for a threat. He saw the threat was not in the room. It was inside her. He put the rifle down. He did not speak. He did not say. It was just a dream. He did not offer empty comfort. He just sat on the edge of her cot, a solid, breathing presence in the dark. He was a wall against the night, a rock in the middle of her terror. Clara was sobbing. The scream had broken her open. The tears she had held back for weeks now came, a flood of grief and rage and fear that shook her small frame. She cried for her mother. She cried for the woman she had been. She cried for the simple, awful fact of being alive when she had so wanted to die. Eli did not move. He just sat there, his head bowed, and let her cry. He let her empty herself of the poison. He was a silent witness to her pain. He did not flinch from it. He did not try to fix it. He just stayed. It was hours, it seemed, before the sobs quieted into dry, shuddering gasps. The cabin was cold. The fire in the stove had burned low. She finally found her voice, small and broken in the dark. "My name is Clara." Eli nodded. He still did not speak. "I was traveling with a preacher's wagon," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Headed for Oregon. I was going to be a teacher." She told him the story, a piece of it, the part she could bear to say aloud. "They were good men, godly men, or so I thought. We were in the woods. They turned on me." She stopped. She could not say the rest. She could not speak of the fight, of the blood she had spilled. Not yet. "They left me?" Eli looked at her. The lantern was turned low, but he could see the tracks of her tears on her face. He had known, of course. He had seen the marks, but hearing even this small part of it confirmed it. He stood up, his knees cracking in the cold. He went to the stove and added more wood, stuffing it full. The fire caught, and a welcome roar filled the silence. He turned back to her. She was watching him, her eyes wide and wet. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had said her name, the first time anyone had said her name in so long. It was a simple, plain word, but in his mouth, it sounded real. It sounded like her. A small, watery smile touched her lips. It was a broken, painful thing, but it was a smile. It was the first one he had ever seen. It changed her face, giving him a glimpse of the woman she had been before the woods. He nodded, a single, curt acknowledgement. "Get some sleep, Clara. The storm is passing." He went back to his bedroll, but he did not sleep. He lay awake, listening to the wind and the fire, and the new, quiet sound of a woman's steady breathing. The snow fell for 3 more days. It piled up to the roof. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin. They were well and truly snowed in. The intimacy of the small space, which had been a source of terror, slowly began to change. The silence between them was no longer painful. It was shared. They moved around each other with a quiet, practiced rhythm. He would chop wood. She would make coffee. He would clean his rifle. She would mend the tear in his shirt, her stitches small and neat. They talked, but not about the past. They talked about the weather, about the traps, about the way the snow looked on the pine trees. Small, safe things. He learned she liked her coffee with a little sugar, a luxury he rarely used. He started putting the sugar tin on the table every morning. She learned he liked his stew thick, with plenty of potatoes. She made sure to add extra flour. One afternoon, he was carving a piece of wood, a small, intricate shape. "What is it?" she asked, her voice quiet. "A piece for a trap," he lied. "A trigger." She watched his hands. They were so large, but they moved with such care, the knife peeling away thin, perfect slivers of wood. She had been so afraid of those hands. Now, she saw the skill in them. "You are a good carver," she said. He grunted, his cheeks flushing a dull red. He was not used to praise. He put the small, half-finished bird in his pocket. That night, they ate at the table. The wind was quiet. The fire was warm. The stew was thick. Clara looked across the table at the man who had saved her. He was not a monster. He was not a saint. He was just a man. A quiet, lonely, and perhaps a sad man. Just like her. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Eli looked up. "For what? The stew? For the fire? In the woods? For this?" She gestured around the small, warm cabin. Eli looked at her for a long time. He saw the bruises were fading. He saw the life, the spark, returning to her eyes. She was still afraid, but she was not beaten. He felt something in his chest, a tight, cold thing he had carried for 10 years, loosen just a little. He just nodded. "Eat your stew, Clara." She did, and for the first time, in a long, long time, it tasted like hope. The thaw came first to the cabin, and then to Clara, as the deep snows of midwinter began to settle, and the sun held a fraction more warmth at midday. The oppressive silence of their shared space began to recede. The world was still white and quiet, but inside, there was sound. There was talk. It began in small ways, a comment about the weather, a question about the traps. Then, one morning, Clara took it upon herself to make the coffee. She had watched him do it 100 times, gauging the handfuls of grounds, the pour of the water. She wanted to do something for him, to feel useful. She made it, and she made it strong. Eli took his first sip, his back to her as he always was in the early morning, staring out the window. He stopped. He coughed, a deep, rattling sound in his chest. Clara's stomach dropped. "Is it bad?" He turned, the tin cup in his hand. His face was a mask of mock horror. His eyes, for the first time, glinting with something other than sadness or suspicion. "Clara," he said, his voice a low gravel. "This ain't coffee. This is cowboy poison. A man could shoe a horse with this." She stared at him, mortified. Then she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. He was teasing her. A small, shocked laugh escaped her. It sounded like a rusty hinge. He smiled back, a real smile, a brief, startling flash of warmth that lit up his hard face. "It'll put hair on your chest, I suppose," she said, her voice small, but finding its old rhythm. "I've got plenty of that," he rumbled, and he took another, more careful sip. "But it's hot. And it's made. I thank you." It was as if that one small joke had broken a dam. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was waiting. That night, by the fire, she was mending one of his work shirts. The needle, unfamiliar in her stiff fingers, was clumsy. "My mother taught me to sew," she said, her voice quiet, directed at the flame. "She said a woman with a straight stitch would never want for a husband." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. "My stitches were always crooked." Eli looked up from the piece of wood he was carving. He was making another bird. He kept the first one in his pocket. She knew. He turned it over in his hands when he thought she was not looking. "My father," he said, his voice just as low, "told me a man was only as good as the horse he rode. My first horse was a 3-legged mule with a mean streak. Broke my arm. Twice." Clara laughed again. This time it was fuller. "What did you do?" "I learned to walk," he said. They sat in the shared humor, the fire crackling between them. The cabin, once a box of terror, had shrunk, but in a different way. It was no longer a cage, but an intimate, crowded space. Every movement was an awareness of the other. The air was thick with it, a tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a simple, bone-deep loneliness. They avoided touching. It became a strange, unspoken dance. If she reached for the kettle, he would pull his hand back, as if the iron were hot. If he passed her to get to the woodpile, he would press himself flat against the wall, giving her inches of space she did not need. But they looked. He would watch her when she was not aware. He watched her hands as she kneaded biscuit dough, fascinated by the efficient, certain movements. He watched the way the firelight caught the red in her dark hair, which she now kept brushed and braided. He saw the bruises had faded, but the hollows in her cheeks remained. He saw her strength, and it did something to him, tightening his chest in a way that was almost painful. She watched him, too. She watched his back as he chopped wood, the muscles in his shoulders bunching and releasing under his shirt. She watched his hands, so large and rough, become impossibly gentle as he carved the small, wooden birds. She would find herself listening for the sound of his footsteps, her body tensing with a strange, nervous energy when he was near. It was not fear. It was something else, something that hummed under her skin, something that made her feel alive, and that terrified her more than the cold ever had. This yearning was a heavy, warm weight in the center of the room. It was safety, and it was danger, all at once. He was the man who had saved her. He was the man who had seen her broken, and he was a man. One night, the stew was finished, the plates were clean, the wind was low. "What were you going to teach?" he asked. He had not looked up from his whittling. The question was so simple, so direct. It stole her breath. "Reading," she said, "and sums, and geography." I had a book with a map of the whole world. I wanted to see it. A school teacher, he said. It was not a question. I dreamed of it, she whispered. She looked into the fire. I dreamed of having a small house, with a whitewashed fence, and children running in the yard, lined up by size. I would have read them stories. She smiled, a sad, distant thing. My father, he did not approve. He said learning filled a woman's head with notions. He said a woman's place was to be silent and obedient. A bitterness she did not know she possessed crept into her voice. He was a preacher. He spoke of God's love, but he never spoke of kindness. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that rose up her neck. Shame for wanting something. Shame for defying her father. Shame for the path that had led her, ultimately, to the preacher's wagon. He said I had too much pride, she said, her voice barely audible. He said it would be my ruin. Eli stopped carving. The knife was still. He knew what it was to be haunted by a father. He knew what it was to be haunted by failure. He set the bird on the table. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his big hands hanging empty between them. My sister's name was Sarah, he said. Clara looked up, startled. He had never offered a piece of himself so freely. She was 17, Eli said, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on a place in the floor. She was bright, like you. She had a laugh that could crack ice. He fell silent for a long time. Clara did not breathe. She knew, with a woman's instinct, that she was in a holy place. She was at the altar of his pain. There was a man, a gambler. He had smooth hands and a rotten core. I told her to stay away. I told her he was no good. He clenched his hands, the knuckles turning white. But I was just a boy myself, all anger and no sense. I thought warning her was enough. I thought I was protecting her by just being there. Being big, being angry. His voice dropped so low, she had to lean in to hear him. He came for her, in her room. I heard her cry out. I broke the door. He was not in the cabin anymore. He was in a dusty room in Kansas. 10 years gone. He had a knife, and I went for him. I was so angry. I did not think. I just wanted to hurt him. And he used her. Eli's breath hitched, a single, shuddering intake of air. He pushed her, into me. She fell, on the knife. I held her. He looked up at Clara, and his eyes were not just sad. They were dead. I held her. She was so surprised. She looked at me, and she just looked surprised. And I failed her. My rage, my pride. I should have been smarter. I should have been calmer. I should have just shot him when I had the chance. I let her die. He was shaking. Not from cold, but from the force of the memory. I've lived alone ever since, he whispered. It was the only way I knew, to keep from failing anyone else, to keep from this. The silence that followed was profound. He had given her his deepest, most guarded secret. He had shown her the wound that was still killing him. Clara's own pain, her own shame, felt small in that moment. She saw his, and it was a mirror of her own. They were two broken things, hiding in the woods, pretending to be whole. Slowly, she uncurled her hands from her lap. She reached across the small space between them. She did not think. She just acted. She laid her hand over his. Eli flinched, a violent, full-body tremor. His first instinct was to pull away. No one had touched him in kindness in a decade, but her hand was warm. It was small, and it was not afraid. It rested on his, a quiet, solid weight. He did not pull away. He turned his hand over, his large, rough fingers engulfing hers, and he just held on, as if she were the only thing keeping him from floating away. A new storm broke 2 nights later. This one was different. It was not the silent, heavy snow of deep winter. It was a howling, violent thing, a wind that clawed at the cabin and screamed down the chimney. Clara woke from a fitful sleep. The fire was low, the cabin was cold, and Eli was gone. His bedroll was empty. A jolt of panic, primal and cold, shot through her. "Eli," she called out. Only the wind answered. She scrambled from the cot. The floor was ice cold. She looked at the door. The bar was not in place. He was outside. "Fool," she muttered, her fear quickly turning to a hot, sharp anger. "You absolute fool." She did not stop to think. She grabbed his sheepskin coat from the peg, the one she had been wearing when he found her, and wrapped it around her thin nightshirt. She jammed her bare feet into her own worn boots, which he had repaired, and plunged out into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow. It stole her breath and plastered her hair across her face. The snow was not falling. It was moving sideways, a furious, horizontal river of ice. "Eli!" she screamed. She saw him. He was standing not 10 feet from the cabin, near the woodpile. He was not wearing a coat. He was in his shirt sleeves, his head bare, tilted back, staring up into the white, swirling chaos of the sky. He was soaked. He was covered in snow. And he was perfectly, terrifyingly still. "Eli!" she screamed again, fighting her way through the knee-deep drift to him. He did not seem to hear her. He was somewhere else. She grabbed his arm. His muscles were rigid, like stone. The linen of his shirt was frozen stiff. "Eli, come inside. You'll die out here." He turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He looked straight through her. "I can't hear it," he said. His voice was a strange, wondering thing, barely audible over the wind. "Hear what?" she shouted, pulling on his arm with all her strength. "Come inside." "Her," he said. He looked back at the sky. The silence. It was always so loud. In my head, after Sarah, just quiet. A roaring, empty quiet. I used to come out in storms. The wind. It was the only thing loud enough to cover it. It sounded like she was screaming. It was a comfort. Clara stopped pulling. She stared at him. He turned to look at her, and this time, he saw her. His eyes focused. The madness in them receded, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking clarity. "But it's gone," he whispered. He reached out, his fingers stiff with cold, and touched her cheek. "It's been getting quieter, ever since you woke up, and now I just hear the wind. It's just wind. Clara, it's not screaming anymore." He was shivering violently. His lips were blue. "You're freezing," she said, her own voice breaking. She grabbed his arm, put her shoulder under his, and half dragged, half guided him back to the cabin. They stumbled inside, and she slammed the door, barring it against the screaming wind. He collapsed onto the chair by the stove, his body shaking so hard the chair rattled. "Get this off," she commanded. Her fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, driving purpose. She did not ask. She grabbed his frozen shirt and ripped it open, the buttons popping and scattering. She pulled the icy, wet cloth from his skin. His chest was pale and covered in goose flesh. She grabbed the driest blanket from her cot and wrapped it around his shoulders, rubbing him hard, trying to bring the life back to his skin. "What were you thinking?" she scolded, her voice sharp with terror. "What were you trying to do?" He just looked at her, his teeth chattering. I don't know. I had to see." They were kneeling by the stove. The fire was almost out. She stuffed it with kindling and wood, her hands shaking, but not from cold. The flames caught, and a warm, orange light filled the small space. It illuminated their closeness. He was wrapped in a blanket, his chest bare. She was in his coat and her nightshirt, her hair wild around her face. They were so close she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. She could smell the snow on him. She stopped rubbing his arms. Her hands rested on his shoulders. "You're a fool, Eli," she whispered. "I know," he whispered back. She was trembling, too, from the cold, from the fear, from the look in his eyes. He was not the hard, cold man from the woods. He was not the broken shell of a man who had confessed his sins. He was just Eli, and he was looking at her as if she were the only source of warmth in the world. She leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "Don't you ever do that again," she murmured. "I won't," he said. He was not shaking as hard. His skin was warming under her hands. He lifted one hand, the one that was not trapped by the blanket, and his fingers, still numb, brushed the hair back from her face. It was the gentlest touch she had ever known, a touch that asked for nothing, a touch that simply was. She did not pull away. She leaned into it. She opened her eyes. He was all she could see, the lines of his face, the gray in his beard, the deep, deep sadness in his eyes that was, for the first time, warring with something else, with warmth. He leaned in. She leaned in. Their breath mingled. Their lips were a whisper apart. And Clara panicked. It was too much. The touch, the closeness, the smell of him. It was not him she was afraid of. It was the other men. It was the memory of a hand that was not gentle, a touch that was not kind. It was the preacher's eyes, the laughing men. It all came flooding back. She shoved him, hard. She scrambled backward, falling off her heels, and Crab walked away until her back hit the logs of her cot. She was panting, her eyes wide with a new, old terror. Eli stared, his hand still in the air. The warmth in his face died, replaced by a devastating, hollow confusion. "Clara, I can't," she whispered, pulling the coat around her like armor. "Don't, please, I can't." He did not move. He just watched her, the new, fragile hope in him breaking. He thought he had understood. He thought he had been wrong. He dropped his hand. He pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice flat and dead. "I won't." He stood up and walked, not to his bedroll, but to the chair at the table. He sat with his back to her, a rigid, silent statue, and stared at the wall. Clara curled up on her cot, her face to the wall, and cried. The next morning, the silence was a sickness. It was not the peaceful quiet of understanding or the tense quiet of fear. It was a jagged, broken thing, full of shame and regret. Eli made coffee. He did not speak. He did not look at her. He drank his cowboy poison, and she could hear him swallow in the still, morning air. Clara could not bear it. She had hurt him. He had offered her comfort, and she had thrown it back in his face. But more than that, she had to make him understand. He had given her his truth. She owed him hers. She stood up. Her legs were shaking. She walked to the window. The storm had passed. The world was a brilliant, blinding white. "I killed a man," she said. Eli froze, the cup halfway to his lips. He turned his head slowly. Clara did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the snow. "That night, in the woods, you deserve to know why I cannot be touched." She told him everything, not the broken pieces she had given him before, but the whole, ugly, bloody truth. "The preacher, his name was Brother Josiah. He said I was a prideful woman. He said he needed to humble me. For God, his men, they agreed. They cornered me by the wagon. They said I had to submit to the will of the Lord. They meant the will of men." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a simple telling of facts. "I refused. I told them to let me go. They laughed. One of them, a man named Silas, he grabbed me. He tore my dress." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I had a knife, a small one, for peeling apples. My mother gave it to me. I struck him. I don't even know where. I pushed it in. He was so surprised. Just like you said about Sarah. He just looked surprised. And he fell." The cabin was so quiet. She could hear the drip of melting ice from the eaves. The other one, Thomas, he screamed. He looked at the blood. He looked at me, and he hit me. He hit me with the butt of his rifle, and he kept hitting me. He said I was a demon, a whore, a killer. He beat me until I stopped moving, and then they left. They just left me there." She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face. "I don't know how I woke up, but I did, and I crawled until you found me." She turned to face him. Her whole body was shaking. "I am not the woman you think I am. I am not some poor, helpless victim. I am a killer, I have a man's blood on my hands. And when you touched me, I didn't see you. I saw them." Eli had stood up. He had not moved from his spot. He had just listened. His face was pale. His eyes were burning. He was silent for a full minute. He just looked at her, at this small, shaking woman who had confessed murder. He saw the shame. He saw the terror. He saw the fight. He walked to her. She flinched, but she did not pull away. She had no more running left in her. He stopped, a foot away. He did not try to touch her. He did not offer a single gesture of comfort. He just met her eyes. "You did what you had to," he said, his voice so quiet, so firm. It was like bedrock. "You fought. They came at you. You fought." He looked at her hands, fisted at her sides. "You survived, Clara." He said it like a benediction. He said it like an absolution. He was not disgusted. He was not afraid. He was not judging her. A sound broke from her, a sound of such profound, agonizing relief it was almost an animal sound. The truth was out, and he was still there. That night, she could not sleep. The confession had ripped the final scab from her wound, and it was all raw, all exposed. She lay in her cot, trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer, violent relief of being known. She began to cry, not the silent, ashamed tears of the morning, but the great, heaving sobs she had held back since the woods. The sobs she had held back since her father had first told her she was worthless. Eli heard her. He was at his bedroll. He got up. He sat on the edge of her cot, just as he had after her nightmare. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, rough comfort in the dark. She did not speak. She just uncurled one hand from the blanket and held it out. He took it. His hand was warm, solid, real. It was not enough. She reached out with her other hand, clutching at his shirt. She pulled herself upright and collapsed against his chest. He was so solid, so warm. He was an oak tree. He was a mountain. He was safe. She cried into his shirt, her body shaking apart with the force of her grief. And he held her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his hand cradling the back of her head. He held her tightly, as if he could physically hold her broken pieces together. He did not speak. He did not kiss her. He did not do anything but hold her. He held her as she cried for Silas, the man she had killed. He held her as she cried for Thomas, the man who had beaten her. He held her as she cried for the schoolhouse she would never have, and the woman she could never be again. He held her, and he whispered into her hair, over and over. The only words that mattered: "I've got you. You're safe. You're safe now. I've got you." And for the first time in her life, Clara believed it. She cried herself to sleep, her head on his chest, his arms a fortress around her. The world began to melt. It started not as a sight, but as a sound. The deep winter silence that had wrapped the cabin in a cotton wool stillness was broken by the sound of dripping. Water, released from its prison of ice, fell from the eaves in a steady, rhythmic tapping. The snow, which had piled in great, fortress-like drifts, began to sigh and settle. It pulled back from the south-facing side of the cabin, revealing a patch of dark, wet earth, mud, thick and grasping, replaced the clean, hard-packed snow. Spring had not arrived, but the promise of it, the long, slow, brutal thaw, had begun. Inside the cabin, Clara had thawed, too. The bruises were long gone, faded like forgotten memories. Her ribs still gave a sharp twinge if she moved too quickly, but she was no longer an invalid. Her hair, which she now washed weekly with the harsh lye soap and rainwater, was thick and dark, braided neatly down her back. She had mended all of Eli's clothes, and then her own dress, the one he had cut from her body. She had pieced it back together with neat, tiny stitches, not because she ever intended to wear it again, but because the work of her hands quieted the work of her mind. The night he had held her, the night of her confession, had changed everything. The tension of avoidance was gone, replaced by a new, deeper, and far more complicated connection. There was a quiet domesticity between them. They moved around the small space with an easy, shared understanding. He would rise, and she would already have the kindling ready for the stove. She would make the cowboy poison, and he would drink it, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that small, secret smile. They were in this one small room, a man and a woman. But with the thaw came the world, and with the world came danger. Clara knew she could not stay. She had known it from the moment the first patch of mud appeared. The snow had been her ally, her prison and her protection. It had kept her safe in this small, hidden place. But the melting snow meant the game trails would open, the passes would clear, the world could move again, and the men who had left her for dead could move too. She was not a burden in the ways of food and work. She earned her keep. She was a burden in the way of blood. She was a danger. She had brought death to one man, and she would not bring it to Eli. He had saved her. He had listened to her. He had held her. He had given her back a life she did not want, and then, impossibly, made it one she was terrified to lose, which was precisely why she had to leave. One morning, the air was warmer, the Chinook wind blowing from the west. Eli strapped his hatchet to his belt and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "The winter stores are low," he said, his voice casual. "The deer will be moving down to the new grass. I'll be gone the day, maybe two." Clara nodded, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "Be careful." "I'm always careful," he said. He paused by the door, and for a moment, she thought he would touch her. He looked at her, his eyes tracing her face, as if memorizing it. But he just nodded, pulled his hat low, and left. She listened to the sound of Boulder's hooves sucking at the mud, until they faded to nothing. She went to work. She cleaned the cabin with a frantic energy. She swept the floor, scrubbed the 2 plates until they shone, and folded the blankets on her cot. She took the linen shirt he had given her, the one she wore to sleep, and folded it, leaving it on his pillow. She found her old boots, the ones he had painstakingly restitched and oiled for her. They were ugly, but they were sound. She packed a small bundle, a chunk of the bread she had baked 2 days before, a strip of dried venison. She looked at the small, carved bird on the shelf, the one he had finished and left for her. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the delicate wings, and for a long, terrible moment, she thought she would break. She put it in her pocket. She was not leaving to die. She was leaving to live, and to let him live. She would walk south, 30 miles, he had said. She would find the railroad line. She would find a town. She would change her name. She would disappear. She would not be the cause of his death. Eli rode south, but not to hunt. The deer could wait. He rode toward the pass, the one that led down toward the Union Pacific line. He needed supplies, not just flour and salt. He needed things. He needed ribbon, a length of calico, things he had seen in the mercantile in town, things he had not thought about in 10 years, things a woman might want. He was a fool. He knew it. He was a man who had built his life on solitude. And he was thinking about calico. He was thinking about her smile, the one she gave him in the mornings. He was thinking about the way she fit against his chest when she had cried. The pass was muddy, the trail slick with melting snow and treacherous rockfall. He was halfway down when he heard the riders. He pulled Boulder into a thicket of pine and waited, his hand resting on his rifle. It was just habit. 2 men rode into view, leading a pack horse. They were rough, their clothes stained, their faces hidden by a week's worth of beard. They were arguing. "I tell you, Silas was a fool," the first one said, his voice a nasty whine. "Getting himself stuck by a little kitchen knife. A woman?" Eli's hand tightened on his rifle. The blood in his veins turned to ice. "Shut your mouth, Thomas," the second man growled. He was bigger, his face a map of old scars. "The preacher said she was a demon. And she was, you saw what she did, and the preacher, he ain't happy. He wants her found. He wants the one who did it." "How are we to find her?" Thomas whined. "This whole country is froze solid. She's dead, eaten by wolves." "The preacher says she ain't," the big man said. "He says he had a vision. Says she was taken in. That A sinner is sheltering her. That's why we're checking these trails. We find a cabin. We find her. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the snow. And we find the man, too, and we purify them both. Thomas shivered. I don't like it. Silas is dead. That's a hanging matter, even if she is a demon. Not if she's a demon, the big man said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. And not if there's no one left to tell the tale. Besides, the preacher wants her back, alive. If we can, he wants to humble her, properly. This time, Eli had heard enough. He had heard the name, Thomas. This was the man who had beaten her. This was the man who had left her to die. A cold, clean rage, the kind he had not felt in 10 years, settled over him. This was not the hot, blind fury that had killed his sister. This was the cold, patient anger of a hangman. He clicked the hammer of his Winchester. The sound was quiet, but in the pass, it was as loud as a cannon shot. "Who's there?" Thomas yelled, pulling a pistol from his belt. "A friend," Eli said, his voice a low growl from the trees. The big man's hand flew to his gun. "Show yourself!" Eli did not show himself. He shot the big man's horse. The horse screamed, a terrible sound, and collapsed in the muddy snow, pinning the big man's leg. The man roared in pain and rage. Thomas, the coward, just panicked. He fired his pistol wildly into the trees, nowhere near Eli. "Drop it, Thomas," Eli said, stepping out from the pines, his rifle level. Thomas froze. He saw Eli, his face cold as stone, his eyes promising death. Thomas dropped his pistol in the snow. You're him," Thomas whispered, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning terror. "You're the sinner." "I'm the man who's tired of listening to you talk," Eli said. He kept the rifle on Thomas, but his eyes flicked to the big man, who was trying to pull his leg free from under the dying horse. It was a mistake, a half-second mistake. The big man, roaring, pulled his own pistol and fired from the ground. Eli felt the bullet. It was a searing, white-hot fire that ripped through his side. He stumbled, the rifle shot going wild. He fired again, by instinct, and the big man's head snapped back. He went still. Thomas screamed. He scrambled for his fallen pistol. Eli did not have time. He was hit, and he was hit bad. He swung the rifle like a club, catching Thomas across the jaw. The man went down in a heap, out cold. Eli leaned against a tree, his breath coming in short, fiery gasps. He looked down. There was blood, a lot of blood. It was streaming from his side, a bright, shocking crimson against the white snow. He had to get back. He had to warn Clara. He did not waste time. He grabbed Thomas's pistol, shoved it in his own belt, and left the man unconscious in the snow. He would not kill an unconscious man, but he would not help him, either. He whistled for Boulder, who was trembling in the trees. He pulled himself into the saddle, a groan of pure agony tearing from his throat. He turned the horse and rode, not south, but north, back to the cabin, back to her. Clara was at the door. Her small bundle was at her feet. She was wearing his coat. She was ready. She had her hand on the latch, and she was crying. She was saying goodbye to the one place on earth she had ever felt safe. She heard the horse. It was too soon. He should not be back. She ran outside. Boulder stumbled into the clearing, his coat slick with sweat and foam. Eli was slumped over the saddle horn, his hat gone. "Eli!" She ran to him. He was holding himself, his hand clamped to his side. His glove was black with blood. He fell. He did not dismount. He just fell out of the saddle, and she caught him. He was a dead weight, and they both collapsed into the mud. "Eli? No," she whispered, her hands flying to his wound. It was so wet, so hot. "Clara!" he gasped, his face as pale as the snow. They know." "They're looking. Thomas. His name was Thomas." The world stopped. Her fear for him and her fear of them collided. "Inside," she commanded. She was not the weak, beaten woman anymore. She was the woman who had survived. She put her shoulder under his good arm and hauled him to his feet. He was heavy, and he was groaning, his feet dragging in the mud. She was all strength. She got him inside, the cabin, the sanctuary. He collapsed onto her cot, his blood staining the blankets she had just folded. "Water," he gasped. "Whiskey." She moved. She did not shake. She did not cry. Her hands were steady. She lit the stove. She put the kettle on. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey. She found the clean rags she had put away. She was his mirror. She was what he had been for her. She cut his shirt away. The wound was a ragged, dark hole in his side. It was high, in the flesh above his ribs. It was bad, but it was not mortal. If she could stop the bleeding, if she could stop the fever. "This is going to burn," she whispered, her voice a perfect echo of his. She poured the whiskey straight into the wound. Eli screamed. It was a raw, terrible sound, and his body arched off the cot. "I know," she whispered, her own tears starting, but her hands did not stop. "I know. I'm sorry. I know." She washed it. She packed it. She found his spare shirt and tore it into bandages, binding his middle so tightly he grunted in pain. She worked for an hour. He drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was done, she was covered in his blood. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely stand. He was alive. He was pale, his breathing shallow, but his heart was still beating. She sat on the floor, her back against the cot, and she finally let the tremors take her. He was alive. He had ridden back for her. He had taken a bullet for her. He woke hours later. The sun was setting, filling the cabin with a bloody, red light. She was still on the floor, her head resting near his hand on the cot. She was asleep, exhausted. He moved his fingers. He touched her hair. She woke instantly. "Eli?" He looked at her. His eyes were clear, but full of pain. You were leaving," he whispered. He had seen the bundle by the door. He had seen his coat on her. Clara's face crumpled. The shame was a living thing. "Yes," she whispered. "To protect you. I heard you ride in. I was at the door. I can't. I bring this. I bring death." "You bring life," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. He lifted his good hand, wincing, and laid it on her cheek. His hand was rough, stained with his own dried blood. "I was a dead man. Clara, I was a ghost in this cabin. For 10 years, until you... Eli, They will come back," he said, his voice gaining a small, iron strength. "Thomas, he's alive. They'll come back for us." "I'll leave," she said, her voice frantic. "I'll go now. I'll lead them away." "No," he said. He grabbed a handful of her hair, not hard, but with a desperate, claiming grip. "You're done running." He looked at her, his gaze so intense it burned. He saw the woman who had faced him with terror, the woman who had confessed murder, the woman who had just saved his life. He saw all of her, and he wanted all of her. She looked at him. The man who was shot, the man who was bleeding, the man who was, in this moment, the most beautiful, terrible, and wonderful thing she had ever seen. The thought of losing him, the thought of what had almost happened, it cracked her open. She leaned in, and she kissed him. She kissed him gently, her lips soft against his, which were dry and cracked with pain. It was a kiss of gratitude, a kiss that said thank you, a kiss that said, "You're alive." He was stiff for a moment, surprised. Then, with a low groan, he kissed her back. He did not pull away. The kiss deepened. It was not gentle. It was everything they had not said for a month. It was the fear, the relief, the shared pain, the desperate, clawing need to be alive, and to be with someone who was also alive. It was passionate, and it was desperate, and it was real. She tasted the whiskey, and the salt of his skin, and the iron of his blood, and she did not care. She kissed him until she had no breath left. He pulled her up, his good arm wrapping around her waist, hauling her onto the cot beside him. She was half on top of him, careful of his wound. She was crying. He was breathing hard, his face a mask of pain and something else, desire, a desperate human need. "Clara," he whispered, his hand in her hair. There were no more words. There was no need. She helped him get his boots off. He fumbled with the ties of her own. They did not undress. They did not need to. She lay beside him, her body pressed tight against his uninjured side. He was so warm. He was her anchor. He was her fire. He pulled the blankets over them both, his arm a heavy, possessive weight around her, pulling her in so tight she could feel his heartbeat against her breast. They slept. It was not the sleep of lovers. It was the sleep of survivors. A warm, breathless tangle of bodies. No words, just the sound of his breathing and her breathing in the small, safe cabin. Clara woke first. The gray dawn light was stealing into the cabin. He was still asleep, his face pale, his breathing even. The bandage on his side was already soaking through. The reality, the shame, crashed down on her. He was shot. Because of her, she had come to his cabin, eaten his food, taken his bed, and then she had slept with him, a wounded man. What kind of woman was she? She was the demon the preacher had spoken of. She was a ruin. She had brought this good, quiet man nothing but blood. She had to go, not to protect him from them, but to protect him from her. She slipped from his grasp. His arm was heavy, but he was in a deep, pained sleep. She slid off the cot. Her feet hit the cold floor. She grabbed her bundle. She grabbed her boots. She would go. He was asleep. He would be safe. They would come looking for her, and she would be gone. "Where are you going?" His voice. It was a low, pained rasp. He was awake. He was watching her. She froze, her back to him, her hand on the door. I have to," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Don't you see? I did this. You're shot. Because of me. They'll come back. They'll kill you. Eli." "So you run," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. He was pushing himself up on his good elbow, his face a mask of pain and a cold, rising anger. "That's your answer. Run until they find you in the snow again. Run until you bleed out in some ditch." "I'm protecting you," she shrieked, whirling on him. "You're protecting yourself," he roared, and the force of it made him cough, a wet, rattling sound. "You're still that scared woman in the woods, begging to die." "I am not." "Then stop running." He shoved himself up, and this time he got to his feet. He was swaying, his hand pressed to his side, his face white, but he was standing. He walked to her. He was in his linen undershirt and drawers, stained with his own blood. He was a terrifying, beautiful sight. He grabbed her arm. "You don't have to run anymore. Clara," he said, his voice dropping, but the iron was still there. "Not from them, and not from me." She looked at him, at the desperation in his eyes, the pain he was ignoring for her. What do we do?" she whispered. "We don't run," he said. "We fight. We ride to town. Not here. The next county. We ride to the marshal." The old fear came back. "Who would believe me?" she whispered. "They'll call me what Thomas called me, a whore, a killer. They'll hang me." He put his good hand on her shoulder. His grip was surprisingly strong. "I'll ride beside you," he said, his voice a vow. "I'll be there. I'll tell them what I saw. I'll tell them what I heard." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "And if they try again, Clara, if Thomas or the preacher or God himself comes for you, they'll never touch you. Not while I'm breathing." She looked into his eyes, and she saw it. The guilt for his sister was gone. It had been replaced by a fierce, protective certainty. He was not saving her to fix his past. He was saving her because she was his. She nodded, a single, sharp movement. "All right." The plan was made. The air in the cabin shifted. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a temporary camp. They packed. It was a somber, determined action. Eli sat on the cot, his face tight with pain, and directed her. He had a second horse, a sturdy pack mule he kept in a lean-to. She was to saddle Boulder for him, and the mule for herself. She packed food, all of it. She packed ammunition. He had a second pistol, a small, 5-shot revolver. He showed her how to load it. His hands were shaking from blood loss. Hers were steady. "You see a man," he said, his voice flat. Who ain't me? You aim for the belly. You don't stop pulling the trigger until it's empty. She nodded. She put the pistol in the pocket of his coat, the one she was wearing. She found the small, carved bird. She held it out to him. He looked at it, then at her. It's yours, he said. I made it for you. She clutched it in her hand. They were ready. He stood up, his face gray. She helped him into his own coat. He put his hat on. He was a shadow of the man who had brought her here, but he was more of a man than she had ever known. He helped her onto the mule. He pulled himself onto Boulder, hissing as his wound tore. They took one last look at the small cabin. It had been their world. It had been a prison, a hospital, a confessional, and a home. It had been the place where two broken souls had, impossibly, found each other. Let's go, he said. They rode out of the clearing, Eli in the lead, Clara right behind him. They left the shelter that had given them love and rode out into a world that was full of judgment and fire and men who wanted them dead. The ride was an agony. Every jolt of the horse, every step Boulder took on the uneven, thawing ground, sent a fresh wave of fire through Eli's side. He rode, slumped, his good hand fisted in the saddle horn. The reins held loose. He was pale, and a sheen of cold sweat covered his face, but his eyes were fixed on the pass ahead. He was losing blood. Slowly, steadily. The bandage Clara had tied was soaked through, a dark, spreading stain on his shirt. Clara rode the mule just behind him, her own body rigid with a different kind of pain. She was watching him die. She was watching this good, strong man bleed out for her. Every labored breath he took was an accusation. Her pistol, his pistol, was a heavy, cold weight in her coat pocket. It was a poor trade, his life for hers. We have to stop, she said, her voice raw. They had been riding for hours, climbing out of their hidden valley and into the next county. Eli, you have to rest. The bandage. We stop. They find us, he said. His voice was a dry rasp, barely louder than the wind. Thomas is on foot, but he'll find his horse. He'll find the preacher. They'll ride fast. We have to get to town first. What good is town if you're dead when we get there? She cried, her control snapping. He turned his head, his eyes burning into hers. The pain had stripped him bare. It's no good if you are... Keep riding. She kept riding. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, and she followed him. They crossed the county line at noon on the second day. Eli was barely conscious. He was weaving in the saddle, and Clara had been forced to stop twice to give him water and repack the wound, her hands shaking as she touched the swollen, angry flesh. He was burning with fever, his skin hot and dry. The town, when they saw it, was a raw, muddy scar in a wide valley. It was not a welcoming place. It was a collection of unpainted wooden buildings, a wide main street that was a river of mud, and a single, stark church steeple. This was it. This was the place where she was supposed to find justice. It looked like a place that had never heard the word. She rode up beside him. Eli, we're here. He roused himself, his head coming up. He squinted against the weak sunlight. All right, the sheriff. Find the sheriff. They rode down the main street. People stopped to stare. They were a hard-looking pair. A man, pale as death, covered in dried blood, and a woman, her face bruised with exhaustion, wearing a man's coat and riding a mule. The whispers started before they had even passed the first saloon. Men on the boardwalk nudged each other. Women, peering from behind curtains in the mercantile, looked away in disgust. Clara felt their eyes like stones. She pulled the coat tighter, her hand instinctively going to the pistol in her pocket. They found the sheriff's office. It was a small, mean building between the bank and the undertaker. Eli slid, more than dismounted, from Boulder, his legs buckling. Clara was there, catching him, her shoulder under his arm. I can walk, he grunted, though he was leaning almost his entire weight on her. She kicked the door open. The sheriff was a large man, his belly spilling over a gun belt he wore more for show than for use. He was sitting with his feet on his desk, reading a day-old newspaper. He looked up, his expression one of pure annoyance. "What's this?" he said. "This man is hurt," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. "We need a doctor. And we need to report a crime." The sheriff looked at Eli's bloody side, then at Clara. His eyes traveled over her, lingering on the man's coat, the mud on her boots, the wildness in her hair. His expression soured. "A crime, you say? Murder," Eli bit out. He pushed himself off Clara and braced his hand on the wall. "And attempted murder." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He looked past Clara, out the open door. He nodded to someone outside. "Stay there, mister. You ain't going nowhere." He got to his feet and walked past them, out onto the boardwalk. Clara turned. "What is he doing?" "He ain't happy to see us," Eli whispered, the fever making his words slur. The sheriff came back in, carrying a piece of paper. He had torn it from the telegraph pole. He slammed it down on the desk. Clara saw her own face. It was a crude drawing, but it was her. The dark hair, the high cheekbones. Underneath, in thick black letters, it read, "Wanted $100 for the murder of Silas Hogan." She stopped breathing. "You're her," the sheriff said, his voice full of satisfaction. "The dangerous woman, the preacher's whore who killed a man in cold blood." "That is a lie," Clara said, but her voice was a whisper. The paper, the words, they were real. They had made the lie real. "It's a lie," Eli said, his voice suddenly, shockingly strong. He pushed himself off the wall. "Her name is Clara, and she was defending herself from 2 men who left her for dead. I found her. I saw the marks." "You saw what she showed you," the sheriff sneered. "This here is a warrant, signed by a man of God, Brother Josiah. He says this woman is a demon, a seductress who lured good Silas to his death." "He's the demon," Clara said, her voice rising. "He's the liar." "That's enough," the sheriff said, pulling his pistol. "You're under arrest, ma'am. And you, mister, you're under arrest for aiding a fugitive." "You can't," Clara said. "He's dying. He needs a doctor." "He'll get a doctor in a cell," the sheriff said. "If he lasts that long." The door of the office flew open. A man stood there, his face red, an apron tied around his thick waist. It was the saloon owner from across the street. "I knew it was her," he shouted, pointing a fat finger at Clara. "I saw her ride in. That's the preacher's whore, the one who ran off." He turned to the small crowd that had gathered on the boardwalk behind him. "The murderer is here, right here in town. Came back with a man, just like I said." The crowd murmured, faces hard and judgmental, peered into the dim office. "Hang her," someone muttered from the back. "This is not justice," Eli said. He was swaying, but he stood tall. He took a step toward the sheriff, his hand held high. "I am Eli. I am a citizen, and I demand a formal hearing. You will not try this woman in the street. You will not convict her on the word of a saloon keeper and a wanted poster written by the men who tried to kill her." The sheriff hesitated. He looked at Eli. He looked at the angry, growing crowd. He was a man who followed the wind. And right now, the wind was blowing hard. But Eli had an authority that had nothing to do with a badge. "A hearing," the sheriff scoffed, but he was uncertain. "A public hearing," Eli said. "In the courthouse. You bring your preacher. We will bring the truth, and we will let the town decide. Or are you afraid of the truth? Sheriff?" It was a challenge, and it was public. The crowd was listening. "I ain't afraid of nothing," the sheriff blustered. "Fine, a hearing, tomorrow, at 10. But she spends the night in a cell. Both of you." "No." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the crowd. A woman, dressed in a simple, clean black dress, pushed her way through the men on the boardwalk. She was in her 50s, her face lined with grief, but her eyes were clear and strong. "Sheriff," she said, her voice carrying, "you will do no such thing." "Mrs. Dunley," the sheriff said, his tone shifting instantly from bully to bootlicker. This is official business. A wanted murderer." "This is Clara," Mrs. Dunley said. She walked past the sheriff, past Eli, and stood directly in front of Clara. She looked at her, her gaze searching. "Clara Miller, you taught my grandchildren their letters. You stayed at my house for a week when the preacher's wagon passed through last fall, before they left." Clara stared at her. She remembered a kind, quiet woman who had given her a warm bed and hot meals. A woman who had smiled when she heard the children reciting their ABCs. "Mrs. Dunley," Clara whispered, the tears finally coming. I, Mrs. Dunley did not hug her. She just put a hand on her arm. "You are not a murderer, child, and you are not a whore." She turned to the sheriff, her eyes like black ice. "This man," she said, pointing at Eli, "is bleeding to death. He will go to the doctor, and then he will stay in my home, and so will she. She is under my protection. You will not put her in a cell?" "But, ma'am, the warrant. The warrant is a piece of paper," Mrs. Dunley said. "Her character is her bond, and I am posting it. You will have your hearing. You will have your justice, but you will not have her dignity." The sheriff looked at the crowd. He looked at Mrs. Dunley, who was clearly the most respected person in the town. He looked at Eli, who was smiling, a faint, pained, triumphant smile. The sheriff was trapped. "Fine," he growled. "But I'll have a deputy at your door. Mrs. Dunley, all night." "As you wish, Sheriff," she said. "It will be refreshing to have a man in the house who is actually doing his job." She turned. "Come, child. Let's get him to the doctor." The hearing was held in the courthouse, which was also the town inn, the dance hall, and the church on Sundays. The entire town was there. They packed the benches. They stood in the aisles. It was a hot, airless room, smelling of unwashed bodies, tobacco, and a high, sharp tang of judgment. Clara sat on a hard wooden bench at the front. Mrs. Dunley on one side of her. Eli was on the other. He was clean. He was bandaged. The doctor had dug the bullet out and declared him a fool for riding, and the luckiest man in the county for living. He was still pale, still in pain, but he was alive, and he was beside her. He wore a borrowed suit, too tight in the shoulders. Clara wore a simple gray dress Mrs. Dunley had given her. She felt like she was at her own funeral. At a table opposite them sat a man she had never seen, a slick-looking lawyer, and next to him, Brother Josiah. He was just as she remembered. Tall, with a pale, handsome face and eyes that looked like they were always staring at heaven. He was a picture of holy righteousness, and next to him, chained, was Thomas. He had been found by the sheriff's deputy, walking and cursing, his face a swollen, purple mess from Eli's rifle. He stared at Clara, his eyes full of a venom so pure it made her sick. The sheriff, acting as magistrate, banged a gavel. "This hearing is called to determine the charges against the woman known as Clara Miller. The charge is murder." Brother Josiah spoke first. His voice was like music. It filled the room, a warm, sad, beautiful sound. He spoke of Silas, a good man, a simple man, a man of God. He spoke of the woman, Clara, a troubled soul, a prideful, flighty creature they had taken in out of Christian charity. He painted a picture of a wanton woman who had tempted Silas, and when he had, in his righteous manhood, rebuffed her, she had killed him in a fit of scorn. Clara felt the room turn against her. The women on the benches looked at her with hatred, the men with a different, hotter, and even uglier look. She was the demon. She was the whore. "And then," Josiah finished, his voice breaking with false sorrow, "she fled, like Cain, with the mark of murder on her. She met this man," he gestured at Eli, "and clearly bewitched him, too. He, a sinner, protecting a killer. This is not justice. This is a tragedy." "Thank you, brother," the sheriff said, clearly moved. "Now, Thomas, you were there. Tell us what you saw." Thomas stood up. He was not a good liar. He was all bluster. She did it, just like the preacher said. She was always making eyes at Silas, at all of us. She She asked him to walk with her in the woods, to pray, and I heard a scream. I ran, and she was standing over him, with the knife. He was trying to give her a Bible, and she stabbed him, just stabbed him, said the devil told her to. Clara gasped. The lie was so monstrous, so complete. And what did you do? The lawyer asked. I tried to stop her, Thomas shouted. She's a demon. She attacked me. I had to hit her to save myself. I thought she was dead, or I'd have brought her to justice myself. The lawyer sat down, looking smug. The case was made. Eli, the sheriff said, his voice flat. You're the one who found her. What do you have to say? Eli stood up. He did not look at the preacher. He did not look at Thomas. He looked at the men and women on the benches. My name is Eli, he said, his voice quiet. But it carried. It was calm. It was sharp. I am not a church-going man. I am a hunter, and I know how to read the ground. He told them. He told them about the blood trail. He told them about the tracks of 2 men and 1 woman. He told them about her crawling. He told them about the marks on her body. I found a woman, he said, his voice dropping, who had been beaten with a rifle butt, who had been bitten, who had marks on her throat, who was left to freeze to death in the snow. That is not the work of a man of God. That is the work of an animal. Objection, the lawyer yelled. This is slander. He ain't done, a voice called from the back. Eli turned his attention to Thomas. And then, 2 days ago, I met this man, Thomas, on the pass. He was with another, and they were hunting. They were looking for the girl who got away. Thomas here, and Eli pointed, was complaining that Silas was a fool for getting stuck with a kitchen knife. He said the preacher wanted her back, to humble her properly. He said they were going to find her, and the sinner who was sheltering her, and purify them both. The room was dead silent. Thomas had gone pale. He's lying, Thomas screamed. I never said that. You said it, Eli said, his voice like a hammer. You said it. And you shot me, you and your friend. You tried to murder me, just as you left her for dead. A criminal, the lawyer shouted. His word against a God-fearing man. Clara, the sheriff said, his voice strained. He was losing control. You stand up. Clara stood. Her legs were water. She thought she would fall. She felt Eli's hand on her back, steadying her. She looked at the faces, all of them, hating her. Tell us what happened, the sheriff said. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. She saw the preacher, his face a mask of false piety. She saw Thomas, his face a knot of pure hate. Speak, child. Mrs. Dunley whispered. Clara closed her eyes. She took a breath, and she spoke the truth. Her voice was low, trembling, but it was clear. She told them, all of it. The way the preacher had looked at her, the way he'd said she needed to be humbled, the way Silas and Thomas had cornered her by the wagon. They said I had to submit, she said, her voice gaining strength. They said it was the will of God. It was not. It was the will of men. She told them about the fight, about the apple-peeling knife. I killed him. I did. I stabbed Silas. He was holding me. He had his hand over my mouth. I did it to save myself. A woman in the front row gasped. And then Thomas, he hit me, and he hit me. He called me a demon. He called me a whore. He left me. He left me to die. She was crying now, but she did not stop. I crawled. I prayed for death. And this man, she looked at Eli. This man found me. He did not ask for anything. He did not hurt me. He saved me. He is not a sinner. He is the only good man I have ever known. She sat down, her body shaking so hard it felt like it would fly apart. The room was quiet. No one knew what to believe. It was her word against theirs. A whore's word against a preacher's. It's a lie, Thomas roared. She's a witch. She confessed. She just confessed to murder. I have something to say. The voice was from the back. A man stood up. A rancher. his face weathered, his hands calloused. He was solid. He was Mr. Henderson, the man who owned the land Mrs. Dunley lived on. "Mr. Henderson?" the sheriff said, surprised. "I know this preacher," Henderson said, his voice a low rumble. He walked to the front, and no one stopped him. "He came through my land last year, with a different wagon and a different girl. Brother Josiah, for the first time, looked afraid. A young woman," Henderson continued. "German girl, didn't speak much English, blonde, pretty. She disappeared. About 3 days after they passed my ranch, the preacher said she'd run off, found a better life." He stopped, his face hard. "I was hunting up in the high country a month later. I found her, or what was left. The wolves had been at her, but I recognized the blue dress she was always wearing. The room exploded. People were shouting. She hadn't run off," Henderson said, his voice cutting through the noise. "She'd been left just like this one. This preacher, he ain't a man of God. He's a monster." The public opinion, the solid wall of hate, did not just shift. It shattered. The women who had been glaring at Clara now turned their faces, horrified, toward Josiah. "Lies!" Josiah screamed, his face no longer holy, but a twisted mask of rage. "Slander! This is the devil's work!" Thomas saw it. He saw the world ending. He saw the rope. He was not going to hang for this. He was not going to hang for a preacher. With a roar, he broke free. He was chained, but he lunged, not at the sheriff, not at the door. He lunged at Clara. You bitch, I'll kill you!" He crossed the space in a second. His hands, his big, calloused hands, were reaching for her throat. Clara screamed. "Mrs." Dunley fell back. Eli moved. He was not a wounded man. He was not a calm man. He was a force of nature. He met Thomas mid-lunge. He did not use his bad arm. He used his good one. He put all of his weight, all of his rage, all of his love for the woman behind him, into one single punch. His fist connected with Thomas's jaw with a sound like a wet branch snapping. It was not a brawler's punch. It was a finishing punch. Thomas went down. He hit the floor and did not move. The room was silent. Eli stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving, his side a fresh, throbbing agony. He had not broken his stance. He was still between Thomas and Clara. The sheriff, his face pale, finally moved. He pulled his pistol, but he did not point it at Eli. He pointed it at the preacher. "Brother Josiah," he said, his voice shaking, "you are under arrest for questioning." He looked at the rancher. "For murder." He kicked Thomas. "And you're under arrest for assault and everything else." That night, they were in the safe house, Mrs. Dunley small, clean guest room. A fire crackled in the hearth. Eli was in the bed, his shirt off, his side freshly bandaged. The doctor had given him laudanum, and he was drifting, but he would not sleep. Not until Clara was settled. She sat in the chair by the bed, just watching him breathe. The town was quiet. The deputy was at the door. But this time, he was there to protect them. "You should sleep," Eli murmured, his voice thick. "So should you," she whispered. She stood up. She could not sit. She walked to the small window, looking out at the dark, quiet street. Her name was clear. Her name, but she did not feel clean. "It's not over," she said. "Mr. Henderson, he said he found what was left of her." She shuddered. I killed a man, Eli. I stood up in that room and I said it, and they're fine with it." "You defended yourself," he said. I'm still the woman who did it. I'm the woman who was with them. I'm the woman who crawled in the snow. I'm the woman they put on a poster. I'm not the school teacher, not anymore. That girl is as dead as Silas." She turned to face him. The firelight caught the tracks of her tears. "I'm damaged. Eli, I'm all scarred." He held his good hand out to her. "Come here." She went. She sat on the edge of the bed. her back to him. He was weak, but his hand was strong. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He was so warm. "Do you still want a woman like me?" she whispered. The question she had been terrified to ask. A woman with a past. A woman who had killed. A woman who had been called a whore in a public room. He did not answer with words. He used his good hand. He turned her face to his, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, passionate kiss of the cabin. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise. He released her mouth, but he did not release her. He kissed the side of her neck, where Thomas's fingers had bruised her. He kissed her shoulder, where the memory of a bite had been. He kissed her hands, the ones that had held the knife. He kissed every place he knew was a scar, every place he knew she had hidden, every place that hurt. He held her close, his lips against her hair, his heart beating a steady, solid rhythm against her back. "I want every part of you. Clara," he whispered, his voice rough with the laudanum and a truth so profound it shook him. "I want the part that's scared. I want the part that's strong. I want the school teacher. And I want the woman who survived. I want every scar. They're all part of you. And I want all of you." She leaned back into him, into the safety, into the peace. It was not the end. She knew that, but it was a beginning. She was in his arms, and for the first time in her life, she was not afraid. She was home. The trial of Brother Josiah was swift. With Mr. Henderson's testimony, the dam of silence broke. 2 other families came forward with stories of the preacher's humbling of young women, of donations that were not donations but theft, of threats cloaked in scripture. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. A verdict that was met with a grim, righteous silence in the packed courtroom. Thomas, his jaw wired shut, was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor for his part in the assault, the attempted murder of Eli, and his role in the German girl's death. Clara's name was cleared. The words were spoken aloud by the sheriff. A public apology was given. Mrs. Dunley held a small party in her parlor. The women who had stared at Clara with hatred now brought her lemon cakes and small, knitted gifts. They touched her arm, their eyes full of a wet, pitying sympathy that was, in its own way, just as sharp as their scorn. She was free, but she did not feel free. She would walk down the main street, and the whispers would still follow her. They were no longer words of accusation, but of curiosity, of morbid fascination. She was the one who survived. She was the one who killed a man. She was the one who was found by the mountain man. She was a story, a piece of town gossip. She was not Clara. She was not a person. She was an event. She still had nightmares. She would wake in the small, safe guest room at Mrs. Dunley's, her hands fisted in the clean sheets, her throat raw from a scream that died in her sleep. She would see Thomas's face. She would feel the knife go in. She would see the blood. Eli was healing. His wound was closing, the angry red fading to a puckered scar. He was quiet, staying at Mrs. Dunley's insistence, but he was like a caged animal. He hated the town, hated the walls, hated the way people looked at her. He spent his days sitting on the front porch, whittling, his eyes never leaving the street, a silent guardian. One night, 2 weeks after the trial, she woke from another dream. She was covered in sweat. She could not breathe. She slipped out of bed, wrapped a quilt around her shoulders, and went to the parlor. He was there, sitting in the dark by the window, a dark shape against the moonlight. He was not whittling. He was just watching. "You should be sleeping," she whispered, her voice rough. "So should you," he said. Not turning, she sat in the chair opposite him. The silence in the room was thick. "I don't think I'll ever sleep again." He turned then. His face was all shadows and angles in the moonlight. "They're still looking at you." "I know. They're still talking." "I know." She pulled the quilt tighter. It's like I'm a ghost. They look right through me. They just see what happened. They don't see me." She looked down at her hands. "My name is Clear, but I'm not. I'll always be the woman from the woods." Eli was quiet for a long time, listening to the clock tick in the hall. He had sold his horse, Boulder, to Mr. Henderson for a good price. He had given his cabin, his traps, everything he owned, to the wind. He had nothing. He had only the money from the horse and the woman in front of him. "What do you want, Clara?" he asked. His voice was so quiet, so simple. It cut through her pain. She looked up, surprised by the question. No one had ever asked her that, not her father, not the preacher, not even herself. She had only ever known what she should do, what she must do. She thought for a long, hard moment. She looked at the man in the chair, the man who had seen every broken piece of her and had not looked away. She knew the answer. It came to her, clear and clean. "I want a place," she whispered, the words tasting new on her tongue. "A place where no one whispers when I walk by. A place where I am not a story. I want just land and your arms." He nodded, a single, slow movement, as if this was the answer he had been waiting for. "All right," he said. They left 3 days later. "Mrs. Dunley cried, and pressed a small, leather-bound Bible into Clara's hands. "You are a good woman, Clara Miller. Don't you ever let the world tell you otherwise. Mr. Henderson sold Eli back his horse for $1 and threw in the mule and a wagon for good measure. A man needs his horse, son, and a woman needs a home to build. They rode west, not north, to his old, haunted cabin, but west, toward the setting sun, toward the edge of the map, toward the places that were still just lines in a government office. They rode for weeks. They left the rolling hills and entered the high, dry country. The air was thinner, cleaner, the sky was bigger, a brutal, beautiful blue that hurt the eyes. Eli's wound was a dull ache, a reminder, but he was stronger. He was not the lone, guilt-ridden man who had ridden into the pass. He was a man with a purpose. He was a man with Clara. They crossed into a new territory, a place of red rock and deep canyons. And one evening, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors of blood and fire and apricot, they saw it. It was a piece of land, not special to anyone but them. It was a high meadow, covered in dry grass, that ended suddenly, terrifyingly, at the edge of a great canyon, a mile wide, 1,000-foot deep gash in the earth. There was a small, year-round spring that bubbled from the rock, feeding a grove of cottonwood trees. It was isolated. It was wild. It was beautiful. "This," Eli said, pulling Boulder to a halt. Clara stood in the wagon. The wind was pulling at her hair. There was nothing. For 100 miles in every direction, there was nothing but rock and sky and silence. No whispers, no pitying eyes, no one. "Yes," she whispered. "This is it." They bought the land at the nearest office, a full 3-day ride away. They paid for it with the last of Eli's money. They were poor. They were alone. And they were, for the first time, free. They built their home from scratch. The first month, they lived in the wagon, under the stars. The first task was cutting stone. Eli, his shoulder and side now strong, swung the sledgehammer, breaking the red rock into manageable blocks for the foundation. Clara, her hands that were meant for a chalkboard, grew rough. She mixed mud and straw, her own form of mortar. They worked from sunup to sundown. They did not talk much. They just worked. Sweat was their language. The second month, they felled trees. They went deep into the canyon, to the places where the pines grew thick and tall. Eli taught her how to use the 2-man saw. They fell into a rhythm. Pull, push, pull, push. His strength, her steadiness. They would collapse at the end of the day, covered in sawdust and sweat, their muscles screaming, and they would laugh. Clara, who had thought she would never laugh again, would sit by the fire, her hands bleeding, and laugh until her sore ribs ached. He was not the silent, grim man from the cabin. He was a builder. He would squint at a log, measure it with his eye, and nod. He was patient. He was exact. And he was, she discovered, gentle. When she would grow frustrated, the saw sticking, her arms burning, he would not sigh. He would just put his big hands over hers. "Easy," he would say. "Let the saw do the work. Don't fight it." They raised the walls. It was hard, honest, brutal work. It was the truest thing she had ever done. Every log they hoisted into place was a victory. Every stone they set was a gravestone for the past. They were not just building a cabin. They were building a fortress. They were building a life. By the first snow, the cabin was built. It had one room, a deep stone fireplace, a real glass window that had cost them a month of credit, and a solid door. It was small. It was rough. And it was the most beautiful place Clara had ever seen. That first night, they lit a fire. The wind howled outside, but inside, it was warm. It was safe. Eli sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his long legs stretched out. Clara sat beside him. They were too tired to speak. He put his arm around her. She leaned her head on his shoulder. It was not a gesture of passion. It was a gesture of completion. They were two halves of a whole, fitted together like the logs in the wall. Life settled? It was a hard life. The land did not give up its gifts easily. Eli worked the land. He broke the soil. He planted corn and beans, fighting the dry earth. He hunted. He was a good provider. He was a quiet man, but he was not the silent man. He would come in from the fields, his face caked with red dust, and he would see her, and that small, private smile would touch his lips. He was at peace. The ghosts were gone. And Clara found her purpose. Word spread, as it always does, even in the emptiness. A family living in a sod house 10 miles south heard of the new neighbors. They came, wary, with a gift of smoked jerky. They had 3 children, 3 wild, barefoot, sun-bleached children who stared at Clara as if she were a strange, new animal. She smiled. "Hello," she said. One day, she was outside, washing clothes. The children had walked the 10 miles, alone, just to watch her. They were curious. She dried her hands. She went inside and came back with her Bible, the one from Mrs. Dunley, and the small, carved bird Eli had made her. She sat on the porch, under the shade of the roof. "Would you like to hear a story?" They sat. They listened. The next week, they came back, and they brought their cousins from a ranch 20 miles east. There were 7 of them. Clara began to teach. She had no schoolhouse. She had no whitewashed fence. Her classroom was the patch of shade under the cottonwood trees. Her desk was the red dirt. Her chalk was a piece of charcoal from the fire. She taught them sums by counting stones. She taught them reading from the only book she had. She taught them geography by pointing to the canyon, to the mountains, to the sky. She was not the woman she had dreamed of being. She was more. She was not a school teacher. She was the teacher. She was the only one for 100 miles. And the children, who had never known anything but dirt and work, looked at her with a fierce, possessive awe. She was theirs. One night, they were sitting on the porch. The day had been long. The corn was high. And Clara had spent the day canning beans. Eli had been mending a fence at the edge of the canyon. They were watching the stars. The sky was so clear, so black. It looked like a spill of diamond dust. There was no moon, just the stars. Clara was leaning her head on his chest. His arm was a familiar, heavy weight around her. They had been married for a year. The circuit judge had come through, and they had stood on the porch, in their work clothes, and said the words. It had been simple. It had been real. She was thinking of the woods, of the snow, of the woman who had begged to die. She seemed like a different person, a stranger. "I never wanted to live again," she whispered, the words a shock, even to her. "That day, in the snow, I wanted to die. I prayed for it. I thought you were death, coming to take me." She felt him kiss the top of her head. "And then," she continued, her voice thick, "you built that fire. You wrapped me in your coat. You were so angry, but you were so kind. I never wanted to live again, until you found me." Eli pulled her closer, his arm tightening. He looked up at the endless, cold stars. He thought of his sister. He thought of the 10 years of roaring, empty quiet. He thought of the screaming wind that had been his only comfort. "And you," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble against her ear. "You saved me just the same." They sat in the quiet. The night was not silent. A coyote yipped, far down in the canyon. The wind sighed through the cottonwoods, the small, peaceful sounds of a life they had built with their own 2 hands. Later, they moved inside. The fire was burning low, a deep bed of red coals. Eli added a log, and a shower of sparks flew up the chimney. Clara sat on the hearth, on the warm stone they had laid together. He sat in the chair he had built, his hand resting on the arm. She moved. She sat on the floor, between his knees, and leaned her back against him, her head resting on his chest. He put his hands on her shoulders, his fingers lacing together over her heart. They sat. They listened. They listened to the fire crackle. They listened to the wind outside. They listened to the quiet. And she knew, with an absolute certainty that filled her bones, that this quiet was not empty. It was not the hollow, terrifying silence of the woods, or the roaring, guilty silence of his past. This quiet was full. It was full of the hard-earned peace, of the children's laughter, of the smell of corn and pine. It was full of him. It was full of them. She was not alone. And she knew, as his arms held her, and his heart beat a steady, slow rhythm against her back, that she would never, ever be alone again. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West to hear more stories just like this one. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey, and we would be honored if you would share your thoughts with us in English.